Hello. Have you ever found yourself spending upwards of a month in Peru and when you were packing, you thought to yourself, Psh, I won't need any knitting projects or knitting supplies because I'll be too busy going to the beach and watching the sunset and climbing up Machu Picchu and watching birds and living in the moment? No? Well, joke's on me because I didn't bring diddly squat and found myself with a lot of free time and a lot of free time. Well, here I am with a lot of time, well, having spent a lot of time in Peru. And I ultimately did buy some yarn and some knitting supplies. And I thought I would walk you through what you might do if you find yourself in a similar position, namely being in Lima without any knitting and wanting to change that. Before I get into it, hi, editing Fred here. Before I actually get into it, I just wanted to put in a little disclaimer, which is that I am not an expert nor an authority on the subject matter at hand. I am just someone who has been to Peru many times in the last 5 years, and I wanted to share my experience navigating the knitting landscape, very much so as a tourist. I thought I would give just a few pointers, a couple pointers, barely pointers, on what I have found to be helpful in my search for yarn and knitting supplies while in Lima. Specifically Lima, not Cusco or Arequipa or any other more textile-centric city, because I am in Lima. The first thing, especially if you're using Google or Google Maps to do a lot of your searching, is figuring out how to optimize your search terms, namely optimize them such that they are in Spanish. So I thought we would do a quick language lesson for knitting terms in Spanish. To begin, you've got knitting or to knit, broadly speaking, which is here referred to as tejer. Excellent. Building off of that, I was looking for knitting needles, and so that can be referred to as I've heard a couple different things from various trusted sources. The first is palos de tejer or agujas para tejer. I think both work if you're looking for knitting needles. More specifically, if you're looking for either circular needles or double-pointed needles, which I was. Circular is simply circular. Double-pointed is doble punta. Self-explanatory. I will say also something very helpful, a little bit of an aside, knowing your numbers in Spanish, very helpful here. They abide by metric sizes, so, if you're looking for 1, 2, 3 millimeter, that would be, 3 milímetros or 4 milímetros or whatever, what have you. Also, asking how much things cost, cuánto cuesta or cuánto es, works more or less. Okay, back to the plot. So moving on from knitting needles, of course, you've got yarn, a world of yarn that exists here. Yarn, most broadly, is referred to as hilo or hilos. If you're looking at different contents or fiber contents, you've got wool, which is lana. You've got cotton, which is algodón. You have alpaca, which is alpaca. And vicuña, which is also vicuña. So we're getting a little bit redundant, but that's okay. I will say from my observations, I would say the breakdown of fiber that I've noticed in stores is like 80% acrylic, maybe okay, fine, I'm exaggerating. Maybe like 70% acrylic, 20% like a cotton blend, or just cotton. There's a lot of Pima cotton here, and like maybe 10% wool, which I found to be very surprising. But anyway, aside, I think vocabulary lesson also complete. I will also say that the results that typically come up in Google or Google Maps are establishments that have an internet or social media presence, which is not all-encompassing of every place that you might find yarn or fiber or supplies. Especially this trip, we've run into a lot of stores and market stalls just going from point A to point B, and they're not on a map. They don't come up in Google. And so sometimes you just have to keep your eyes peeled, especially if you're walking past a market with a lot of different stalls or like a mini mall, essentially, which are very prevalent here in Lima. Let's get into the meat of the matter, which is that ultimately I succeeded in finding yarn and needles, but I visited a lot of different stores and establishments in my quest. And I thought I would do a little bit of a recap, a highlights reel. So one of the places I visited is called Outgoing Knit. It was one of the first results that came up when I was looking for yarn and knitting supplies in my immediate area in Lima. It is in San Borja. And great things I have to say about it are it has a very comprehensive website that essentially lists everything in their inventory, and so I could look for the exact needles I wanted. I could look for yarn. It seemed like they carry their own line of like in-house dyed yarns, which is very nice and not something you see that often here. I ended up getting 2 sets of interchangeable needles from Knit Pro. So they carried a few different lines of Knit Pro needles, which I have not used before, but I have heard of. And so I got 2 sets of their most basic stainless steel needles in 3.5 millimeters and 4 millimeters and a 32-inch cable. I paid 25 soles each for each set of tips, which is about $6.83 in US dollars. And I paid 19 soles for the cord, which is about $5.19. So I would say comparatively priced to needles in the US, maybe marginally cheaper. But yeah, I really enjoyed that store. I would say I went there on my own, so did not have my Spanish-speaking companion with me, and more or less navigated successfully. The next store I want to talk about is called Alpaca, which I gotta say out the gate is 100% a tourist trap. They primarily sell finished alpaca goods and garments, but they also have a tiny display of baby alpaca yarn from a brand called Indicita, which I have used in the past and have purchased in Peru in the past and have liked using. I typically wouldn't buy this yarn from here, but they were running a 20% off sale, and so I thought, why not? Otherwise, another store that I can recommend that carries the same line of yarn is Nakayama Knits in Miraflores. Both of these stores are in Miraflores. So I ended up getting 4 50-gram balls of a baby alpaca yarn, which I paid 80 soles for, which is about $21.85. So not great, not terrible, pretty middle of the road pricing. I very much so feel that if you feel like a tourist in the store that you're in, odds are you will be paying tourist prices. The next store I want to talk about is a little store called Entre Lanas, which is in Santiago de Surco. It is a cute little store. It did not have a huge selection of yarn, but it did have a very comprehensive collection of different yarns from a company called Amano Yarns, which is a Peruvian brand, Peruvian-made yarn brand. And I've used some yarn from them in the past. I've gotten some baby alpaca from them in the past, but I was very pleased to see that they had a much more comprehensive selection, including some non-superwash merino. And so I got a couple of skeins of their line of non-superwash merino, which is called Riti Light. And yeah, they had some really, really nice colorways that I was a big fan of. If anything, I wish I had gotten more than just 2 skeins, but you live and you learn. So for 2 50-gram skeins, I paid 30 soles, which comes out to be about $8.19, which I feel is not bad, not crazy. $8 for 100 grams is, I feel like, what I expect to pay for like a Cascade 220. So nothing crazy there. The next store I want to talk about is dédalo, which is perhaps my favorite store in Lima. It is very much so targeted for the tourist. I gotta say that much. But what I really appreciate about them is they have a very wide and unique selection of contemporary handicrafts and gifts that I find to be more compelling than what you might otherwise find in the more so mass-produced craft markets that you might encounter here. And so that's a little bit of an aside, but they do also carry yarn, which is nice. So like the previous store, they do carry a lot of yarn from Amano Yarns, but they also carry a few different other lines of natural dyed yarn. I will say their selection skews more so bulky or art yarn-esque, which is not personally for me, but could be for someone. But it is just one of their many offerings, and I would highly recommend visiting the store regardless of whether or not you're looking for yarn. It is my go-to place for gifts. Honorable mention, there's a market nearby called Mercado éden, which we primarily go to for meat and fish and fruits and vegetables, but they also have a huge selection of different stalls and vendors where you can get any number of things, including yarn and other notions. And I found myself needing double pointed needles in a pinch because I had bought the circular needles from Outgoing Knit, but then realized I was doing a project with a bunch of I-cord, and I was like, okay, I think I want double pointed needles, but I didn't really want to go back to that other store because it was kind of far away. And although I survived our interaction, it was gently mortifying, and I was feeling not ready to return. Sorry, this is a complete and total aside. But anyway, I had noted that in this market, there are not one, there are not two, but there are, I think, at least 3 stalls that specialize in yarn and knitting and crochet notions. And so I figured it was worth a shot trying to find some double pointed needles. And that I did. So I got a set of some double pointed needles for the sweet, sweet price of 8 soles, which comes out to be about $2.19. I will say, of course, they're not the highest quality. I think they're made out of acrylic. They're quite sticky. They're not, of course, smooth in the way that stainless steel is, but they did the job, and I was not upset about it. Would recommend visiting your local market when in Lima to see what they might have to offer. I will say I didn't buy any other notions from these stalls, but I will say they're almost certainly more competitively priced than some of the standalone knitting stores. If you're looking for things like stitch markers or tapestry needles or cable holder or stitch holders or anything like that, would highly recommend checking these kinds of stalls out first before shelling out bigger bucks at a standalone store, if saving money is the name of your game, which it might not be. Don't want to make any assumptions there. But yeah, that was my highlights reel. Okay, Before we get into the final part of this video, bird break. All right. All that said, I did knit some things. I got yarn, I got needles, and I knit a couple of things. So the first thing I knit, it was the ballerina wrap top by Two of Wands. I used the free pattern that's available on their website. And I'll say this much. I didn't gauge swatch. I don't usually gauge swatch. And I fly by the seat of my pants usually when I knit. And that's my prerogative, okay? I don't want to hear it. And I will say the fit is not bad, but it does leave some things to be desired. And I think part of it is that I don't have the boobage that maybe the pattern is designed for. And so there's a lot less coverage than I would hope. But what's a girl gonna do? I do like it though. I also was kind of playing yarn chicken because I only bought so much. I did what I say I'm never gonna do. I never do, which is buy yarn without a project in mind. I really only knew that I wanted to get DK weight yarn, but was just like, I'll figure it out. And so I was kind of playing yarn chicken the whole time with being like, oh, how long should I knit this? You know, whatever. And so it's a little bit shorter than one would hope, but the pattern doesn't really lend itself very well to being modified with the wrapping, with the way that it wants to be wrapped. So I wouldn't say I'm like unhappy with how it turned out, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily something that I'm gonna be reaching for constantly in my wardrobe this summer. I was like, oh, maybe I should frog it, but I already woven all the ends and they're like deep in the I cords and I don't know how I'm gonna get them out. And it's a problem for future me. I'll say that much. The yarn that I primarily used for the wrap top is the yarn that I got from Entre Lanas from Amano Yarns. It's the non-superwash merino. I just did some of the I cord with the baby alpaca that I got because I thought it would be fun. It's not exactly color blocked, but I kind of had the idea of doing like a ringer baby tee kind of vibe with the different colored sleeves and stuff. But I definitely didn't have enough of the non-superwash merino to make the whole shirt. So of course I had a lot of the baby alpaca to work with, and so I made the Lirio top by Cecilia Garcia Rodrigo. This I would say was a much more successful project. I will say I'm still getting used to wearing tank tops. So it doesn't really quite, I don't feel that comfortable in it yet, but that's my problem and not the pattern's problem. I will say though, things that were the pattern's problems, a lot of typos and a lot of missing stitch counts, which for me, like, of course you could always do the math yourself, in which case in a lot of this pattern, I did the math myself, because I like using stitch counts to track my progress, especially with a pattern that has a lot of decreases like this one. But I find it annoying that like half the pattern had stitch counts and like half the pattern didn't. So it's like, what happened there? I don't know, whatever. I really like this top and thought the drape of the baby alpaca would be nice. So that's what I made. I have a little bit less than 50 grams left of this baby alpaca, and so I'm wondering, should I hop on the Sophie Scarf bandwagon? We'll see. Anyway, that's all. Thanks for watching. Ciao for now.